Hello everyone and welcome back to One Nerd to Rule Them All. First off, I would like to apologise for not uploading over the last couple of weeks, but I am back now and ready to commit to my regular upload schedule. Today I'll be covering the Siege of Gondor, also known as the Siege of Minas Tirith. I've got a lot to cover, so without further ado, let's get into the story. Gondor was first attacked on June 20th of 3018 when the forces of Mordor launched a surprise attack on the ruined city of Osgiliath. However, whilst the eastern half of the city fell, Boromir, the son of the steward Denethor II, successfully defended the western half by destroying the last bridge that crossed the Anduin River. 9 months passed after the skirmish in Osgiliath, when Sauron's servant Saruman sent forth a large army to destroy the people of Rohan. They were, however, defeated by the forces of the Rohirrim in the Battle of Hornburg. After this decisive victory, Aragorn revealed himself to Sauron through the Palantir of Orthanc, which spurred the Dark Lord into action, making him send his main armies before the full force was prepared. He decided to release his long-prepared army in hopes of quickly annihilating his greatest enemy, Gondor, before aid could arrive. Due to the threat of the huge fleet of Corsair warships sailing from Umbar, the southern fiefdoms of Gondor sent far fewer people to aid Minas Tirith's defence than expected. There was no dawn between March 9th and 10th. This was the day which is called the Dawnless Day. A large cloud from Mordor silently crept over the lands of Rohan and Gondor, covering the sun and preventing sunlight from penetrating the clouds. Sauron's purpose was to instill fear amongst the army of the west, and to ease the passing of his minions who feared daylight. On that same day, an army from the Black Gate emerged and captured the island of the Caer Andros. The purpose was twofold: to prevent the Rohirrim from reaching Minas Tirith, and to attempt to cut off the garrison at Osgiliath. The muster of Rohan, led by King Theoden, left the camp of Dunharrow, the beacons of Gondor being lit 1 day prior. During the Dawnless Day, the ring-bearer Frodo Baggins, along with Samwise Gamgee and their guide Gollum, approached Minas Morgul. When they arrived, they saw a red flash emanating from beyond the eastern mountains, likely from Ordruin, which was answered by lightning and blue flames ensuing from Minas Morgul and the surrounding hills. The Witch King of Angmar emerged from the city on a black horse, accompanied by an army stated to be larger than any that departed from the Vale since the time of Isildur. This was the smaller of Sauron's forces, the largest host issuing forth from the Black Gate. On March 11th, Denethor sent forces to reinforce the garrison at Osgiliath, expecting a large blow from the enemy. After giving a report to Denethor, Faramir left to command the garrison. That night, however, they were attacked by the Witch King's forces, who had been joined by Haradim's regiments. In the morning of the next day, despite stout resistance, the Witch King's forces crossed the Anduin and Faramir retreated to the Causeway forts, the wall surrounding the Pelennor fields, holding the position for most of March 12th. Gandalf arrived to give heart to the defenders, remaining there for most of the day, before escorting wounded back to Minas Tirith. Although Faramir and his men resisted stoutly and inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy's forces, the Witch King's army began to breach the wall, forcing Faramir to retreat with most of his remaining men, but was soon overtaken by orcs and Southrons pouring onto the fields. Prince Imrahil and Gandalf led a cavalry sortie which allowed the retreating men to regroup and return to Minas Tirith, but Faramir was wounded. He was wounded by Southron's arrow and was carried to Imrahil. Upon arriving at the city, the enemy sprawled before the main walls of Minas Tirith. They quickly put up siege equipment and dug trenches. A large force of orcs and Easterlings was sent to guard the northern roads against possible reinforcements from Rohan. It put trenches and stakes on the road, enough to halt any charge. On March 13th, the Witch King began to soften the defences of the city. However, the outer wall of Minas Tirith, the Othram, built when the Númenóreans in exile were still strong, was as impregnable as the Tower of Orthanc. The siege engines of Mordor, whilst not penetrating it, were able to launch incendiary missiles into the lower city, setting it ablaze. The heads of casualties and prisoners taken in Osgiliath and at the Causeway forts were also hauled into the city to demoralise the defenders. Soon, dismayed by the cries of the Nazgul and the seeming hopelessness of its defence, most of the men on the wall had fled into the second circle of the city. A distraught Denethor refused to command the defence, as he thought the entire city was to be destroyed, as Faramir was doomed to die. Gandalf and Imrahil then took charge, and inspired hope wherever they went. In the night, a large siege tower was dragged to the walls of Mumakil to test the garrison. The main assault was launched against the Great Gate, the only vulnerable point in the wall. This was done by a huge battering ram, Grond. However, the resistance was stoutest at this point, and the forces of Mordor suffered high casualties. Grond was hurled against the gate 3 times, but on the third try, it and the Witch King's magic managed to destroy the gate completely. The Witch King then entered the city, with only Gandalf upon Shadowfax confronting him. At this moment, the horns of the Rohirrim sounded, forcing the Witch King to leave and to confront the new foe. With the arrival of the Rohirrim, the men of Gondor were encouraged and sorted from the city to attack their besiegers, beginning the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. After the coming of the Grey Company and reinforcements from southern Gondor, the siege was completely overthrown. This siege features prominently in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, with some modifications from the book. Following their successful overturn of the city of Osgiliath and subsequent massacre of Gondor's relief forces sent to liberate it, the army of Mordor began to cross the river in force under the supervision of the Witch King and Gothmog. On March 13th, the Orc forces assembled for battle on the fields of Pelennor, complete with drummer trolls, catapults and siege towers. The host was so large altogether that it stretched wider than the city itself. Within the walls of the city, the men of Gondor stood idle, as Denethor was too consumed by madness to even notice the siege had begun. The Orcs opened the battle by launching the severed heads of the relief forces into the city, as a form of psychological warfare meant to demoralise their enemy. Overwhelmed by grief, despair and insanity over the supposed death of his youngest son Faramir, Denethor took one look at the Mordor army arrayed outside the city and declared that all was lost, and shouted at the defenders to flee for their lives. This notion was quickly dispelled, however, as Gandalf swiftly knocked out the raving steward, assuming command of the city's defences and ordering preparations for the battle to be made immediately. As the Gondor soldiers raced to take up positions and ready for combat, the Orcs opened fire on the walls of the city with their catapults, causing serious damage and sowing havoc. Undeterred, Gandalf ordered the defenders to return fire immediately with the city's trebuchets. The Gondor soldiers were helped somewhat by the fact that while the Orcs' catapults were indeed causing a lot of damage, they were also inadvertently providing the defenders with an abundance of ammunition with which to fire back, that being the debris falling all around them. The defenders themselves began to hurl large chunks of the city itself back at the Mordor forces, inflicting heavy losses on the Orcs, who were nonetheless ordered to remain stationary. Furious at their defiance, the Witch King and the other ringwraiths launched a surgical strike into the city and systematically demolished the trebuchets. The Mordor siege towers, meanwhile, moved even closer to the city walls. At first, the city archers shot at the towers to no avail. Gandalf quickly redirected their forces to the trolls below, pushing the towers. Though the trolls were rapidly shot down, the towers were reaching the city, allowing battalions of Orcs to pour out onto the outer walls. Unfortunately for the Orcs, the defenders were too well organised for the wall to be taken, and their offensive was blunted. At the base of the wall far below, the Orcs brought up a rudimentary battering ram to break open the main city gate. The ram, however, could not make so much as a dent in the massive and powerful gate, and the Orcs were under constant fire from the Gondor archers above, resulting in yet more heavy casualties for the Orcs. Undeterred, Gothmog brought up the infamous super battering ram known as Grond. A massive siege weapon required no less than 6 trolls to use. Seeing the hammer of the underworld approaching, Gandalf took several detachments of the soldiers down to the city courtyard to stem the Orcs' advances. Outside, Grond began bashing through the city gates, and the attackers drew up from the imminent offence. In just 6 strikes, Grond punched through the city gates, and the defenders readied themselves, their courage fortified by the elven ring of the power Narya worn by Gandalf. On the 7th strike, the city gate burst open entirely, unleashing armoured trolls and a flood of orcs into the city. Despite a valiant resistance from the Gondor soldiers and their Astari commander, they could not hold back the tides of enemies and were eventually forced to retreat to the city's 2nd level. Now confident of the victory, Gothmog ordered his subordinates to move into the city and kill all in their path. As first light appeared on the following day, the battle raged on throughout the city. By then, however, the defenders were exhausted and close to defeat, numbering barely 2,000 left alive, while the helpless civilians huddled together at the city's peak. While leading the defenders back to another level, Gandalf was alerted to the burning of Faramir by Pippin, whereupon the two stormed the immolation ceremony and rescued Faramir while his deranged father burned alive and threw himself off the ramparts to his death. Sensing an opportunity, the Witch King of Angmar confronted the wizard and the hobbit, intending to slay them both. Though he managed to break Gandalf's staff, the wraith was interrupted by the timely arrival of the Rohirrim from the west, forcing him to leave prematurely and beginning the concurrent Battle of the Pelennor Fields. While the battle was fought out on the fields, the orcs inside the city cornered the remaining defenders on the 3rd level. As they readied themselves to make their final stand, they were saved by the intervention of the newly arrived dead men of Dunharrow, who swept through the city like a cleansing flood, slaughtering every orc and evil creature within. In the early drafts of The Lord of the Ring, the Siege of Gondor, originally called Ondor here, was the first major battle of the War of the Ring, given the absence of the Battle of Hornburg. The stakes were even higher, as the Dark Lord marshalled all his might against the White City. The host of Mordor would have been joined not only by the people of Rhûn and Harad, but also hordes of Moria and Isengard, with Saruman acting as commander of Sauron's armies instead of the Witch King. Following the breaking of the Fellowship, Trotter, or Aragorn, and Boromir travelled to Minas Tirith and joined the men of Ondor in their fight. During the assault, the lords of Minas Tirith would perish, leaving Trotter in charge of the city's defences, much to Boromir's displeasure. Jealous of Trotter and bereft of hope and victory without the One Ring, Boromir betrayed his people and went into the enemy camp, seeking Saruman's aid in becoming the new lord of Minas Tirith. The siege would be broken by Gandalf, sent back from death as the White Wizard, or the Giant Treebeard in some versions. However, it was in subsequent drafts that J.R.R. Tolkien came up with the idea of Rohan riding to the aid of Gondor. This is the story of the Siege of Gondor. I hope you enjoyed this first battle breakdown. I enjoyed doing it. If you like this content, then please leave a like and a comment down below on any other battles or characters you would like me to do in the future videos. That is it from me. I have a wonderful day. Bye for now.